we'd like to welcome you to the Lighthouse. And I'm going to turn the music down just a little bit. It's not hard to get, Now, let's start over again. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Lighthouse. Glad for you to be here. If it's okay with you, I'm going to ask if we can kind of move a little closer, because we have an important message that we want to grasp, and I think that we can enjoy it better if we are closer to the front. Can we do that? Let's move a little closer, if you don't mind. Thank you very much.
Did it go? Is it on video?
No. Oh, there it is right there.
This is our Health Emphasis Day, and we are so glad to have you here. And of course, we have known for many years that hypertension is called the silent killer, and that there has been a disproportionate effect on African American communities with respect to hypertension. But we probably didn't know that there was a connection with Alzheimer's. So we are going to learn something today, and I'm glad that you have come out. I'd like to welcome our guest from the Alzheimer's Association. He's going to be speaking with us, and of course Dr. Reid is here. And right now I'm going to ask Dr. Reid to introduce his family.
In that box. In the Amazon
Well, we have a long distance guest with us today. My mother and my father are here. Herman and Edith. You all
That's the brother.
You look like you're not old enough to be my father.
Oh,
You're like my brother.
thank you.
They're here from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So they've come a long way today to be a part of this talk today. And obviously my sidekick, my road buddy here, Reid, my wife, we're tied at the hip. So where she goes, I go. That's exactly right. So that's the only two things.
All right, thank you very much. We'll continue on with the program now. I'd just like to have a little bit of a quick introduction to Dr. I'd like to ask you, what is it like to be a Christian physician? You know, I've noticed you here, obviously, and a lot of times when physicians are involved with churches, I mean, the churches come to them and say, oh, you know, we have this special project, and we'd like you to help out this, can you bankroll that? Because, you know, the perception is that physicians make a lot of money, and we love having physicians in churches. And we're so delighted that you are at the Lighthouse, because you could be, frankly, at any church. Amen?
Amen.
But beyond that, beyond your presence here, you have stepped up and started teaching here. And that puts you in a whole different level as far as I'm concerned. So tell me what it's like to be a Christian physician.
Well, in one word, what I do is I do obstetrics and gynecology. And so obstetrics is obviously the delivery of babies and taking care of women who are pregnant. And there are not any, there's no other profession that I know of that allows you to witness a miracle of God every time you do it. Every time you do it. Every time you deliver a baby, you are witnessing a miracle. Because there's only one individual that can create that miracle. And that's God. So that's the obstetrics part. When I go to the operating room, and that's another part of what I do, I never go into the operating room without allowing myself time for prayer before I go to the operating room.
Wow.
So I leave home through time to do whatever I have to do, and my wife will attest that some days I'm up extremely early, 4 o'clock, 3:30.
Amen. I can attest to that one. Yes.
2 o'clock. Part of that is to do what I have to do in terms of my work at the hospital. Part of that is just to stop and sit down, don't focus on anything, but just speak to God.
Do you pray for your patients?
I do. For those that like to have prayer, I offer that too.
Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord.
Now, it's really interesting how we're interfacing our Sabbath school quarter with Nehemiah, what he did before he did it. He had the same practice before he did anything. He sat himself down before saying anything, thinking anything, doing anything. He sat himself down, thought about what it was that was before him, and then he would pray. So it was good enough for him. It's good enough for me.
Amen. Amen. And I can just imagine you being in the operating room and the Holy Spirit sending you a tweak saying, do this, don't do that, fix this. Yes?
Well, what it is some of that, but what it is, a lot of, is you see the human body respond in a way that you may not have expected it to respond. One thing that when you take a patient to the operating room is that you are the final arbiter of what's going on with that patient. And many of those times it can be a life or death situation. I do not know anybody, I know I would not want to go to the operating room without first asking God to give me what it is that I need that day to make every correct decision for that patient. I would not even be so bold as to think that I had the ability to do that alone. And when you see and when you witness the complexity of the human body, then you say, thank God, while you're operating. So a lot of times you may, things look familiar, but you stop, and a lot of the surgery I do, I have just the ability just to stop where I'm at and don't do anything and say thank God.
Praise the Lord. I'm sure you have read Ellen G. White's writings where she says that the health message is the entering wedge of the gospel. As a practicing physician, how do you see that in real terms?
Well, as part of what I was going to refer to today is 1 Corinthians 6:19. It tells us that our body is the temple of the Holy Spirit. We don't own it. A ransom's been paid for. And so what should we do with that body? We should honor God. So for me, that joins my work with God.
How did you get interested in Alzheimer's? Did you have a personal experience or a family member or someone?
No, I have nobody that I know personally that has Alzheimer's disease. But the one thing about Alzheimer's disease is that we know that it affects African Americans in an unequal way, more so than other parts of the population. But Alzheimer's disease is a disease that starts at the time that you're born. So the more that you can do to prevent that when you're born, younger years, middle years, later years, then the more likely it is that you won't have to deal with the significant issue of Alzheimer's disease. So it's lifestyle, it's how you eat, what you do, how you live your life, and I'm going to point out a lot of these things in our message today. But really, people, it's not working. No. Is that better? Yes, okay. I'm sorry. So what I was saying was that Alzheimer's disease is really a disease of prevention and really trying to restore what a person has lost. On the restoration part of it, we have challenges with that because once a person starts to have Alzheimer's disease, we don't have a way to reverse that. But there are a lot of things that we can do from the day we're born to lower our risk of having to deal with Alzheimer's later in life. And we're going to speak about some of those things that we can do as our parents can do for us, children should be doing, children should not be doing. And as that lifestyle, as you migrate, take that lifestyle and integrate it into your own life, if you adopt those habits, then you really reduce your risk of developing Alzheimer's down the road. So really, it encompasses the entire spectrum, the entire life. Some people just see Alzheimer's as a disease that affects older people, but that's really not true. It's not true.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's just give a warm applause for Dr. Herman Reid.
Well, when they told me that Dr. Salters was going to interview me, I got nervous. But thank you for the introduction. I want to first take a moment, because what I try to do in all times, all phases of my life, as I just said a moment ago, was before we do anything, what do we do? We pray. That's exactly right. So we want to stop. Let's bow our heads, and we're going to have a word of prayer before we get started. Heavenly Father, we just want to just come before you and bow our heads, God, and say, thank you again for what you have given us. God, you know that we have done nothing to approach your creative power, but we stand back and we marvel at it. And we thank you, God, for allowing us just to have today just a small peek at just how an awesome God you are. You are excellent. And we thank you, God, for giving us the privilege to see just how you have created the body, and particularly the human brain. It is a computer like none other. And so, Lord, we thank you for that. We thank you again today for our entire church staff. We want to thank you for the people that came today to join us here at Lighthouse. Thank you for the people that prepared lunch today. We're so lucky to have people look out for those that are coming here, give them something warm to eat. And again, we just want to thank you, God, for the environment here where we can have our Health Ministry Day and again celebrate you and your awesome creative power. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So I want to thank just the leadership of the church, Geraldine, my friend, and the Alzheimer's Association who are here. We thank you for all of your work. My parents, who I just mentioned a moment ago, they've come a long way to support me in this effort of bringing this message here today. And my sidekick, my wife. If you see me, you see my wife. I do nothing without her, and she knows it. And so I thank her for all of her support, all of her encouragement. And like I pray about everything, I don't do anything before I present it to my wife and say, what's this sound like? Take a look at this. When I do something, read it and just tell me how it comes to you. So her opinion is just invaluable too. I hope I haven't forgotten anybody else, but all of friends and again, all of our associates here. Pastor Barnes, again, thank you for dedicating the time for our Health Ministry Day today. But my hope is that this can be the start of something that we can visit on a more regular basis where we speak about health issues that really affect us. Now, healthy living is intertwined in the Adventist religion. There's no other denomination that I know of that combines religion with healthy living like the Seventh-day Adventists do. But we have been not as aggressive as we should be about getting this health message out. And so we know that Adventists stand on just what I spoke about a moment ago. 1 Corinthians 6:19, where it says that our body is the temple of the Holy Spirit. And so we don't own that. We don't own the body. So we're charged with honoring God with our body. So we should do nothing to defile the body. Now, as I was speaking a moment ago when I was in the kitchen there having lunch, I'm a member of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. And this is a large academy that was created about 10 years ago, and it's housed at Harvard University. And its primary function basically is just to put out peer-reviewed health information to help people transform their life and live healthy lives. It's to promote healthy living. As I travel around to some of the meetings on lifestyle medicine, the medical community is observing the results of the Adventist healthy lifestyle. Adventists frequently appear in studies as control groups, and many in the medical community have adopted the lifestyle practices of the Adventists, and they readily admit that Adventists live 10 years longer than the average American. So the average Adventist woman lives now to the age of 89, and the average man lives to 86. Adventists are the longest living people in this country, okay? And Adventists have the nation's lowest risk of heart disease, diabetes, and obesity. So through our health message, we have a lot of helpful information at our disposal. And today, we will apply some of that information in an effort to help us begin to live longer, healthier, disease-free lives. Now, I gave a paper so you can follow along with the presentation today. And basically, as I go through the presentation, I will just point out the number where we're at in the presentation. It'll also allow you to write down questions as it pertains to those particular points. And then when we have our question and answer portion of the program, we can come back and answer those questions. Okay? I'm slated for an hour. We will not be an hour here today. Okay, 35 minutes or so. And it's good just to make the point, let people have their questions, and then we'll come back and answer those questions. But my talk today is going to be focused on 3 areas, and I'm in number 1 on your sheet. Okay. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to explain why African Americans have an increased risk of Alzheimer's disease, and it is directly related to the high incidence of obesity, diabetes, and hypertension that we see in African Americans. We're going to look at other risk factors that African Americans have for developing Alzheimer's disease. And then finally, number C, we're going to discuss just 5 strategies to reduce the risk of developing Alzheimer's. Some of these five strategies are being studied presently right now as a way to prevent Alzheimer's, but also begin to reverse early Alzheimer's disease. Okay? So before I begin to get into hypertension, what I want to do is I want to take a moment to speak about obesity. Because obesity is the #1 cause for hypertension in the country today. And today what we're going to do is we're going to connect being overweight / being obese to hypertension, to brain disease, to Alzheimer's disease. Okay? Obesity is directly related to an increased risk of developing hypertension and diabetes. When we all go to our doctor's office for a visit, the doctor weighs us. And what the doctor does in your weight, that weight is converted to your BMI. And that's a number that we should all know. BMI is basically just an indication of just how heavy you are, perhaps how much adipose you have on your physical body. An ideal BMI is between 20 and 25. A BMI of 26 to 30, you're overweight, and then over 30, you're considered to be obese. Now, 60% of Caucasians in the country today are either overweight or they're obese. 70% of African Americans and Hispanics are overweight or obese. But ongoing is the group that makes up the highest portion of those people being overweight or obese, and that falls into our black people. So about 70 to 80% of black women today are either overweight or they're obese. Obesity accounts in and of itself for about 365,000 deaths per year. That alone, just being overweight, kills that number of people. And so our takeaway is that 2 out of 3 people in the United States are either overweight or they're obese. That was number 2 on my list when I opened about obesity. So the numbers on obesity, they really have not changed really in the past 10 years. The numbers on obesity do explain in part why hypertension and diabetes are at record numbers in the general population, and especially in African Americans and Hispanics. But obesity rates, particularly as they affect black women that we take care of, that concerns the most for most providers who are taking care of this group of patients. Why? Because obviously it's going to increase their risk of developing diabetes and hypertension. But we see today escalating rates of breast cancer in black women, far above what we see in the normal population. And part of that is because that a lot of our black women just weigh more than what we should. So on an individual basis, most cases of obesity can be related to 2 things. Either an increased intake of poor food, processed food, fast food, and a lack of exercise. released just a year ago in October of 2018, two Cleveland Clinic cardiologists. They looked at 225,000 people for 25 years. So a lot of people for a long time. And they looked at their lifestyle and they looked at heart disease. And what they concluded was this, is that a sedentary lifestyle, meaning that you don't do any exercise, you don't have any exercise, not part of your routine, in terms of killing you, was worse than hypertension, it was worse than diabetes, and it was worse than smoke. So we know that sitting is the new smoking. Okay? So really that implores us that we really need to become more active in our life. If not, just being sedentary in and of itself is a killer. Okay? So given the strong association between obesity and hypertension and vascular disease, especially in African Americans, this afternoon I want to take a look at the link between hypertension and the risk of developing Alzheimer's disease in African Americans. Now at the outset I want to say that this information that I'm going to present on Alzheimer's disease applies just to more than African Americans. Alzheimer's disease is a big problem, and we don't hear very much about it in the African American community. We don't see very much of it in our advertising, but most of us have a family member, we have a friend, or we know somebody that has been affected by Alzheimer's disease. It's a big problem, and for African Americans, it's getting bigger, and it's getting bigger faster. Okay? Uncontrolled blood pressure and heart disease increase the risk of developing Alzheimer's disease in every ethnic group, but especially if you are black. Recent evidence shows that if your top number on your blood pressure is less than 120, then you are 20% less likely to develop Alzheimer's disease straight away. So if your blood pressure is controlled, your top number is less than 120, you've reduced your risk of having Alzheimer's by 20%. Now, let's take a look at the link in African Americans between having hypertension, heart disease, and the risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. And we'll first take a look at hypertension and heart disease and the brain in African Americans. And I'm at number 3 on your paper, okay? Heart disease is the #1 cause of death in the United States today. 600,000 people die from heart disease in the United States. That's 25% of all the deaths in this country occur from heart disease. That's more than twice the number of people that die from cancer each year in this country. Treatment for hypertension is the #1 reason in the United States for doctor's visits, and it's the #1 use for prescription medication in the country today. However, only half the people that are taking medication for their high blood pressure have their blood pressure adequately controlled. And so in 2017, the definition of normal versus high blood pressure, it changed. Why? Because we see so many people who start out with a blood pressure of 120 over 60 or 70. You see them a year later, it's 130 over 80. And then you see them a year later, it's 140 over 90. So what the American Heart Association did along with the American Academy of Cardiologists was they redefined what a normal blood pressure is. So your blood pressure is normal if it's less than 120 over 80. It used to be 140 over 90, but that's not true anymore. Your blood pressure is elevated if your blood pressure is between 120 to 129 over less than 80. You have stage 1 hypertension if your blood pressure is between 130 to 139 over 80 to 89. And you have stage 2 hypertension if your blood pressure is 140 over 90 or greater. So whereas 2 years ago, 140 over 90 was just okay, now we see you have stage 2 hypertension. Okay? That is in an effort so that we can begin to treat people sooner so that their blood pressure will be better controlled, because now we understand the ramifications, or some of the ramifications of having uncontrolled blood pressure. In African Americans, and I'm on number 4 on your page here, in African Americans, hypertension is more common and more severe than in any other ethnic group, and it presents earlier in life. And those risk factors include obesity, again, ingestion of poor quality foods, an increase of dietary salt, a lack of exercise, poverty, and genetics. We can't totally discount the genetics part of this. But the incidence of complications from hypertension is also greatest in African Americans, and that includes especially the risk of having a stroke. So if you're black with hypertension, you are twice as likely to have a stroke when your blood pressure is not controlled. Blacks under 50 with hypertension are 7 times more likely to have a stroke. There's a lot of African Americans below 50 who have hypertension in their blood pressure. Either they don't know their blood pressure or their blood pressure is elevated. These insults to the brain from hypertensive disease including strokes, causes many changes in the brain, but the brain ultimately begins to shrivel and it begins to shrink. It begins to get small. Number 5 on your list. In 2017, there were 46 million African Americans that lived in the United States. That's 14% of the population. However, 40% of African Americans are affected by hypertension. And the prevalence of hypertension in African Americans is the greatest of any ethnic group. So it affects African Americans more than any other group worldwide, okay, but clearly here in the U.S. Number 6, 70% of African Americans are overweight or they're obese. And this in itself, just obesity itself, can account for 25% of all the cases of hypertension. So thus far, we have connected being overweight / being obese and the development of hypertension. There's a direct link between your weight and your blood pressure. Persistent obesity makes it more difficult to control blood pressure, even if you're taking medication, and weight loss alone, in and of itself, will cause your blood pressure to go down. So our takeaway, number 7 on your list, about hypertension, is that uncontrolled hypertension and diabetes in African Americans causes changes in blood vessels and nerves in the brain that causes the brain to shrink. These damaged blood vessels and nerves in the brain cause a marked increase in the risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. So if you look, the number of African Americans that are obese or they're overweight is about 70%. That's 32 million people. That's associated with hypertension. And we understand that 40% of African Americans have hypertension. That's 18.5 million people. That's associated with brain damage, and that's associated with Alzheimer's disease. So we see here where our focus needs to be. We need to go back and we need to begin to really reevaluate our weight, what we're doing to get our weight down if it's up higher than what it should be, because that then is going to decrease our risk of everything else going down the line, including the development of Alzheimer's disease. Number 8 on your page. Let's look at the definition of dementia and Alzheimer's disease. Dementia is basically just a loss of mental functions, such as thinking, memory, and reasoning. This loss is severe enough to interfere with a person's daily function. Alzheimer's disease is the most common cause of dementia in older adults. So it's the most common cause of people losing the function of their brain. Alzheimer's disease is a progressive disease that damages nerve cells in the part of the brain involved in memory, learning, language, and reasoning, and that part of the brain is called the hippocampus. That's the word for today. I'm going to come back and ask you that word. What did I say? I said hippocampus. That's an important part of your the brain. As the disease progresses, communication between these damaged nerve cells breaks down. And in early stages, short-term memory begins to fail. And over time, functions such as long-term memory, language, and judgment begin to decline as well. Alzheimer's is the 6th leading cause of death in the United States. The exact cause of Alzheimer's is unknown, but researchers have identified many risk factors in addition to the obesity, the diabetes, and the hypertension that we spoke about a moment ago. There is no known cure now for Alzheimer's disease. And there are basically 2 types of Alzheimer's disease. One is early onset, and one is a late onset. The early onset we generally see in people who are less than 65 years of age, and that's more likely to run in families. The late onset of Alzheimer's is much more common, and that generally affects people who are over the age of 65. Currently, about 5.5 million Americans suffer from Alzheimer's disease, and about 22,000 people a year die from Alzheimer's disease. The Alzheimer's Association estimates that 1 in 10 people over the age of 65 will develop Alzheimer's. So number 9 on your list, the brain abnormalities that we see in Alzheimer's disease. Studies show that chemical and structural changes in the brain of Alzheimer's patients occurs in a specific portion of the brain called what? The hippocampus. The hippocampus is taken from a Latin word which means seahorse. And if you look at the hippocampus in the human brain, it looks exactly like a seahorse. Okay? The hippocampus is buried deep within your brain at the base of your brain. And these changes interfere, again, with a person's ability to process, store, and retrieve information. And it's not known exactly why these changes occur in this part of the brain. But scientists have found 2 significant abnormalities in the brain of people who have Alzheimer's disease. The nerve cells in the brain, it gets tangled up, and those are called tangles. For some reason, the nerves that are not straight, they kind of get twisted on themselves. And then there's a sticky protein that some of you may have heard called beta amyloid, which basically forms these structures called plaques. So when you look at the brain of a person who has developed Alzheimer's disease, you'll see that these nerve fibers are tangled up, and they have these plaques that are deposited in the brain. Tangles and plaques are associated with damage to healthy brain cells, causing the brain, again, to shrivel and to shrink. And hypertension is associated with this type of brain damage. So here we've connected hypertension to Alzheimer's disease, because we see people who have hypertension, long-standing hypertension, who have developed Alzheimer's disease. We see again in that patient, almost 100% of those people have what we call these tangles and these plaques. So what are some of the other factors that affect African Americans? And I'm on number 10 of your paper. Okay? We know that African Americans, as I said earlier, have a higher risk of developing Alzheimer's disease than any other ethnic group in the country today. The Alzheimer's Association reports that African Americans can be 2 to 3 times as likely to develop Alzheimer's, and Hispanics can be 1 to 2 times as likely to develop Alzheimer's as our Caucasian counterparts. Researchers have found that the following 10 factors are possible contributors to the increased risk of Alzheimer's disease in African Americans. And I'm at A in number 10. We spoke a moment ago about cardiovascular disease, hypertension, strokes, and congestive heart failure. These conditions are strongly tied to an increased risk of dementia, and cardiovascular disease includes, again, high blood pressure, coronary artery disease, congestive heart failure, and strokes. B, financial insecurity, poverty. Researchers have found that individuals who experience sustained poverty for over 20 years performed lower on cognitive assessment tests. When I say cognitive, I just mean brain assessment tests. African Americans are at a higher risk for poverty than any other ethnic group in the country. The U.S. Census shows that 25% of African Americans live in poverty, while only 10% of Caucasians live in poverty in the country today. Diabetes, C. Diabetes is associated with an increased risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. Diabetes is significantly higher in African Americans than any other ethnic group in the country. And Alzheimer's disease has been nicknamed type 3 diabetes due to its strong association, diabetes, with the development of Alzheimer's disease. So diabetes really increases your risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. Letter D, lower education levels, meaning people who are undereducated or poorly educated. Lower levels of education present a significant risk for the development of dementia. And I want to say that again. Lower levels of undereducation, that means people who are poorly educated, people who are undereducated, they themselves have a much higher risk of developing dementia. Now, higher education levels are thought to reduce dementia risk in part related to an increase in the brain, in a person's brain. A person who's been educated more, they have a higher what we call cognitive reserve and cognitive fitness. So you have brain reserve and brain fitness just by being better educated. This is an extremely, extremely important point, and I'm going to spend a few moments on this here. An important concept that is crucial to understanding brain health is known as your cognitive reserve or your brain reserve. You can think of your brain reserve as your brain's ability to improvise and find alternate ways of getting a job done. Your cognitive reserve is developed by a lifetime, and I want to underline this, a lifetime, because when we started, we said that Alzheimer's starts at the day you're born, and it will go until you develop Alzheimer's if you're unfortunate enough to do that. But it's a lifelong issue. And so your cognitive reserve is developed by a lifetime of two things. One, your education, and that's not all formal education. You can educate yourself in many ways. And the second is how intellectually curious you are, okay? These two things help your brain better cope with any failure or decline that it faces throughout your life. Now, how did they come up with this? The concept of cognitive reserve, or your brain reserve, originated in the late 1980s when researchers described individuals who had no apparent symptoms of Alzheimer's disease who were nonetheless found at autopsy to have some of the most advanced forms of Alzheimer's disease in their brain. So while they were living, they functioned perfectly. When they died, they did an autopsy, looked at the patient's brain, and they see that they had advanced forms of Alzheimer's disease. These individuals, while they were alive, did not show any symptoms of the disease, and because they had a large enough cognitive reserve to offset the damage from Alzheimer's, and they continued to function as usual until they died. Since then, research has shown that people with a greater cognitive reserve are better able to stave off degenerative brain changes associated with dementia and Alzheimer's disease, and other brain diseases like Parkinson's disease, multiple sclerosis, and again, stroke. A more robust cognitive reserve can also help you function better if you're exposed to unexpected stresses or unexpected life events like stress and like surgery. Therefore, a very important goal is to build and sustain your cognitive reserve. Now, you can get a rough idea of your cognitive reserve simply by doing this. You ready to do this? Gauge how much your education, your work, and other activities have challenged your brain over the years. What is the hardest thing that you've asked your brain to do? She says think. That's a good answer. Well, again, at Harvard, they have developed a 6-step program that will help you improve your brain's reserve. And this program highlights 6 pillars of brain health that can help you sustain good brain function and cognitive fitness. Now, I put on the paper cognitive fitness because cognitive fitness is the ability to learn, to reason, to remember, and to adapt your thinking process into old age. Improving your reserve and your fitness are important to protect your brain from developing Alzheimer's disease. Now, those 6 steps that Harvard came up with are these. They said that these lifestyle changes, all working together, so these must be put together to give you the benefit of all 6. Adjusting what and how you eat, lifestyle changes. How much you exercise, lifestyle changes. How you deal with life's challenges, stress management. How you interact with other people, the quality of your personal relationships. And how you continue to educate yourself, your cognitive reserve, and how you work on improving your socioeconomic status. So if you change these behaviors into habits that you can sustain over the long term, they'll have a dramatic effect not only on your brain fitness, but also on your overall health. So no stronger case can be made for continuing to educate yourself, to continue to read, to continue to learn, and to use your brain, especially as you get older. So slowing down in your later years, stopping work, going someplace and sitting down, and sitting someplace and basically just saying, I'm just not doing anything now, is extremely, extremely dangerous. It is equally dangerous for our children not to use their brain. And that's a topic for another day. That's another health ministry day there. But it is very, very dangerous for our children not to be taught, not to be trained to use their brain. Remember that your cognitive reserve is something that you develop over your lifetime. So that tells us that it takes a long time for us to reserve that, to develop that reserve in our brain. Now, let me give you an example of what will not help your brain reserve or your brain fitness. Video games and screen addiction. I can do that. I can explain it. I'll give you an example. I'll give you a testimony. Some of you have heard me say this story before, but in August, me and my wife were on vacation, and we were traveling back to Atlanta from Portland, from Oregon. Excuse me, we had been up to Alaska. So we got our plane ticket, and we were in there going to the airport, go to the plane, get on the plane and everything. And so we said, well, we better get something to eat, get something to read, and then we go sit down on the plane and get ready to go. So we get 2 sandwiches. My wife goes in the store and she buys a Bible book, some timeline in the Bible. And I told her, you don't need that, but she told me, yes, I do. Again, her wisdom is far beyond my understanding. She did do that. And I bought the New York Times. It was a Sunday. So we're going to get on the airplane. I'm by the window. My wife's here in the middle. This gentleman that comes in, he's a young man, maybe in his mid-20s, late 20s. He gets on the plane as well, sits next to my wife. So he hops on the plane, pulls out his game thing, his Xbox, whatever it is. I don't know what it is. It's these things they play with. You can't turn it on until you get up in the air above 10,000 feet. So, he's got his headphones on, his thing's plugged in, he's ready to go. 10,000 feet, you get the bing on the thing says you're above 10,000 feet, and you can do Wi-Fi. He's on this video game. Me and my wife eat our sandwich. Had lunch. I opened my newspaper, my wife opened her book. I fell asleep. I woke up. My wife took a nap. She woke up. The entire 5.5-hour flight from Oregon, this gentleman is like this. It's like this whole thing. And I'm like, I looked over there and this looks like a Pac-Man type game. I'm like, how could a human being subject themselves to that for 5.5 hours? We were getting ready to land, get below 10,000 feet, turn things off, plug it in, so I asked my wife, was that individual on that long? I mean, it was amazing that a human being could do that for 5.5 hours with no visible break. It was absolutely insane. And I don't think that's abnormal. I think that's basically getting to be the normal today. But that in and of itself will do nothing for your brain fitness or for your brain reserve. Okay? African Americans, on average, tend to have lower education levels than do whites. And when the history of this country is reviewed, it is noted that our system prevented, and it continues to prevent, many African Americans from access to the same educational systems that others attend. For too many students, schooling is separate for African Americans, and funding for education is less than it is for majority schools. Access to equal educational opportunities continues to be problematic. Systemically, our country prevents equal access to education, contributing to lower educational levels, which again is associated with an increased risk of dementia. So we see people that are poorly educated, undereducated. Some of that is delivered here where we live at in this country, and all that is contributing to a higher level of dementia and Alzheimer's as these young children get older. I mean, E on your sheet, exposure to lifetime stressful experiences, stress. In 2017, the Alzheimer's Association International Conference, which was held out of the country, I think it was in Europe, they found that early stressful life experiences for African Americans were correlated with reduced cognitive performance in later life. So early stresses in life meant that you had poor performance on these cognitive tests later in life. What did they find for stressful situations? Being fired from a job, legal and justice system problems, lack of financial security, conflicts with other people, emotional and physical trauma, health problems, experiencing combat, and that's not necessarily in Afghanistan or Iraq or someplace, combat here, right here in the United States. Having a parent who abused drugs or alcohol, and the death of a child. For African Americans, each of these stressful life experiences was equivalent to 4 years of aging on your brain. So if you were exposed to 3 or 4 of these events, if you were a 60-year-old person, then really your brain age is about 75 or 76. It's pretty amazing. Number F on our on your paper. Being born in a state with a high infant mortality rate. That same year, 2017, another study was presented at this same meeting, and researchers found that African Americans born in states with high infant mortality rates were 40% more likely to develop dementia than African Americans that were born in low infant mortality states. It's interesting that Caucasians didn't suffer that same risk. It was only African Americans. So where are the states with the highest infant mortality rate? Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, North Carolina, and South Carolina. That's where a lot of African Americans are born in this country. G, chronic psychological stress. Researchers found that African Americans are 20% more likely to experience psychological stress than their white counterparts. H, living in disadvantaged neighborhoods. The researchers found that participants who lived in disadvantaged neighborhoods had lower scores on tests that measured immediate memory, cognitive speed, flexibility, working memory, and verbal learning. I, your family history. If you have relatives who have Alzheimer's, you're more likely to develop Alzheimer's disease, although there's no real clear link between an inherited form of Alzheimer's disease. There's no more than 1% of the cases can be linked to just an inherited form of the older form of Alzheimer's disease. That's after you develop it after you're 65. And alas, your sex, Alzheimer's disease is more prevalent among women than it is in men. So our takeaway thus far is that there's a strong link between being overweight and obese, developing hypertension, brain changes, and Alzheimer's disease. And then when you add these 10 factors that we just spoke about a moment ago, this explains why African Americans are 2 to 3 times more likely to develop Alzheimer's disease than other people in the population. So we're number 11, strategies for reducing our risk of Alzheimer's disease. We are now with Alzheimer's disease where we were with heart disease 40 years ago. 40 years ago, we discovered that the damage that's done to the heart by coronary artery disease could be turned around relatively quickly if a person modified their lifestyle. They lost weight and went on the diet. Many recovered from this heart disease with only lifestyle changes. There was no medication or nurse surgery that was required. We know today that what is good for the heart is good for the brain. Now, there's some exciting research going on this year, and when I was at our meeting in May, there are some researchers that are looking at this year to see whether we can apply the same principles that we used in treating coronary artery disease to the treatment of Alzheimer's disease, early Alzheimer's, to see whether we can get some of those symptoms to get reversed. So that's going to be reported out in the next year or so. So that'll be very interesting to come back to see whether we can make some impact on reversing early Alzheimer's disease. What we have to say to ourselves, is there a blueprint to reducing our risk? Is there some people doing something somewhere that are employing some things that are reducing the risk of developing Alzheimer's disease? And the answer to that is yes. Back in 2016, there were 5 groups of people that were looked at worldwide because they were living longer, healthier, productive lives, and they were living in areas called blue zones. Have you ever heard of this concept called blue zone? A blue zone is where there is a high concentration of people who are living to be 100 years old or older, but they're healthy. They're very healthy. They're leading very productive lives. 4 of these places are outside of the country. One is in Greece, one is in Japan, one is in Italy, and one is in Costa Rica. There's only one blue zone in this country where people are living beyond 100 years or older and they're being productive. And some of us have an idea where that is, right? Where is that?
Loma Linda.
It's Loma Linda, California. And it's in Loma Linda because so many Adventists live there. Let's look at these 5 groups' lifestyle as a blueprint for what we can do to see whether we can begin to reduce our risk. This morning, when I was asked to close church, I said to Dr. Barnes about restoration, and I said that we would be speaking about prevention and restoration. And Pastor Barnes used the example of Cain being restored, and it was God who did that. Well, let's look at these 5 groups of people and see what they're doing. The first, at the top of the list, and these are all 5 communities worldwide, okay, not just the Adventist. Healthy centenarians, that's people who are living beyond 100 years of age, everywhere worldwide have a deep and abiding faith. They believe in God. All belong to strong religious communities, and when you listen to the interviews, and this year we had, when I was at our meeting in Boston in May, they actually played some of the interviews of some of these 100-year-old people, and they spoke about their relationship with God. And when you see that, and when you see that God is our first priority in our life, then life makes sense. Refer to Romans 8:28 today, where it says that God causes all things to work for the good of those who love Him and who are called according to His purpose. The simple act of worship is a powerful habit that seems to improve your chances of having more good years. Just worship itself seems to give you an advantage of living more good years. Christian, Muslim, Jew, Buddhist, or Hindu, no difference. They all live longer, more productive lives. Studies continue to show that attending religious services, even just once a month, may make a difference in how long and how well you live. People who attend church are less likely to engage in harmful behaviors. They're more likely to take on healthy habits. They're physically more active. They're less likely to smoke, to do drugs, to drink, and they're less likely to drink and drive. They have a forced schedule of self-reflection, decompression, and stress-relieving meditation, either through prayer or sitting quietly during church services. It is true that there are blessings that you will only receive by attending church.
Yes, sir.
You will not get them if you're on the golf course,
Right.
if you're in the mall, if you're on Facebook, if you're any other place, you're going to miss that blessing. People who attend church have higher self-esteem and self-worth because religion encourages positive expectations, which in turn can actually improve a person's health. Adherence to religion allows people to relinquish the stress of everyday life to a higher power. 34,000 Adventists in Loma Linda were studied for 12 years, and those who attended church regularly had a 20% less likely chance of dying at any age, just because they went to church. The faithful are healthier and they're happier. Those that place God first in their lives have lower rates of cardiovascular disease, depression, stress, and suicide. Their immune systems seem to work better. And very, very early research points to religion and spirituality possibly reducing the risk of Alzheimer's disease. And for those who already have early Alzheimer's disease, religion may play a part in slowing the progression of this disease. So we see at number one, top, far and away, it's God and our relationship with God. Number two, they have a variety of interests. They're intellectually curious. Now again, this is all 5 groups. And I'm going to speak about a term called neurogenesis and a term called nerve sprouting. Long names, but they're extremely, extremely important. Neurogenesis is just the making of new brain cells, nerve cells in our brain. At one time, researchers and scientists thought that neurogenesis was a fixed process. And what they thought was that you were born with all the nerve cells you were going to have in your brain, and that over time you would begin to lose those cells, and then your mental function would generally start to gradually kind of fall off, leaving you with fewer and fewer brain cells to function with. As a result, your brain would eventually start to shrink, and your capacity to learn and remember would decline. But in the 1990s, it was discovered that neurogenesis, that was not true. That neurogenesis did, in fact, occur, and guess where it occurred? What part of the brain were we talking about? In the hippocampus. It happens in human brains. For the next 20 years, researchers studied this idea, and in 2013, it was shown conclusively that 700 new brain cells are created in the adult hippocampus every day. This process was found to continue into your 70s and beyond. In recent years, scientists have discovered that certain factors can slow or stop the process of these new nerve cells being made, while other factors may actually stimulate this process. Stress, sleep deprivation, and aging can all slow the formation of new nerve cells. Aerobic exercise, like running and being active, actually speeds up this process. So if we're physically active, then we're encouraging our brain to make more nerve cells in a specific part of the brain that is affected by Alzheimer's disease. So we can do something about reducing our risk if we become more physically active. Now, not only is neurogenesis possible long into adulthood, but you also have the ability to form new nerve connections in your brain as you age. These new nerve connections essentially rewire your brain in response to your life's experiences. And this process is called nerve sprouting. For example, when a part of your brain is injured or damaged by disease, undamaged nerve cells begin to sprout, and they make new nerve endings that connect with other undamaged nerve endings to create new pathways within your brain. When you stimulate your brain by listening to complex music or learning difficult things like a new language, you also promote the formation of these new connections. So you see, when we're asking our brain to do difficult things, when we're challenging our brain to do things, our brain not only is making new cells, but it's making new connections within the brain so that we're better able to do a lot of things. Our brain is better able to function. And what that does is it pays dividends going long down the road for us being able to function in your older years like you did when you were a young person. Now, by continuing to stay mentally and physically active, by remaining intellectually curious and constantly learning new things and exercising, you can maintain or even improve your ability to perform many cognitive functions with age. There is no reason for us to expect that your mental function should decline with age if we continue to challenge our brain. 3, or C, they pay attention to their diet and to nutrition. These 5 groups of people that eat a plant-based diet. The best foods for your brain turn out to be the best foods for your heart and your blood vessels. Again, our diet should be a plant-based diet. That means green leafy vegetables such as kale, spinach, collards, that are rich in brain-healthy nutrients. These nutrients go right to the brain and help the brain function and work more efficiently. These healthy nutrients like vitamin K, lutein, folate, and beta-carotene, these nutrients are vitamin K, lutein, folate, and beta-carotene. Research suggests that these plant-based foods may help slow your cognitive decline. So by eating these foods, it will allow your brain to continue to function better, but it will also slow the effect of your brain decline. Fatty fish. Fatty fish, like salmon, cod, light tuna, and pollock, they're a rich source of omega-3 fatty acids. These healthy unsaturated fats have been linked to lower levels of beta-amyloid. That's the protein that we see in the brain of people who have Alzheimer's disease that forms these dangerous plaques in the brain. So eating fish that are high in omega-3 fatty acids helps prevent those plaques from developing. Now, if you're a person that doesn't eat fish or like salmon, then probably what you need to do is explore with your physician how you can get other sources of omega-3 fatty acids. Other sources of omega-3 fatty acids are avocados and flaxseed. C, flavonoids. Flavonoids are plant anti-inflammatory antioxidants that are associated with a decreased incidence of cancer, heart disease, and brain disease like Alzheimer's. Flavonoids are what give fruits their bright color. And that's what gives berries their bright color as well. Harvard did a study of women and women who consume 2 to 3 portions per week of either strawberries or blueberries. They declined, their mental decline was delayed by over 2.5 years just by consuming 2 to 3 servings of blueberries or strawberries a week. Now, I want to say a quick word about antioxidants because we hear a lot of them. The benefit of eating food that's high in antioxidants is that when we eat food, we burn up food, we metabolize food, part of the metabolism of food is that it spins off what we call these free radicals. Free radicals are what we think are big causes of cancer. If your diet is poor in antioxidants, then you will have nothing to bind up those free radicals. If you eat a diet that's high in antioxidants, then by eating, when you're going through the process of metabolism, then you'll have antioxidants on board so that when this food is burned, it'll bind up those free radicals, again, reducing your risk of cancer, heart disease, and mental diseases. Nuts are an excellent source of protein and healthy fats. One type of nut in particular improves your memory. Anybody know what that is? Walnuts. It's walnuts, absolutely. Walnuts are high in a type of omega-3 fatty acids which helps lower blood pressure and protects our arteries. That's both good for the heart and it's good for the brain. The Mediterranean diet is one of the most rigorously studied eating plans. This diet is also considered one of the healthiest diets overall. And people who make their home along the coast of the Mediterranean Sea in Spain, Italy, and France, they eat a diet that is rich in fresh fruits, vegetables, fish, beans, nuts, olive oil, And those people also drink red wine. I'm not advocating drinking red wine, but what red wine has in it is a compound called polyphenols. And polyphenols, they act just like a scrub brush to your coronary arteries. They just continue to keep your coronary arteries clean. Those people who drink modest amounts of wine, a glass of wine a day, there in the Mediterranean area, they have the lowest rates of cardiovascular disease against them. Okay? Now, these foods that people in around the Mediterranean Sea eat are filled with healthy fatty acids, and they're filled with oxidants as well, antioxidants, excuse me, that combat disease. The benefits to the brain likely come from the antioxidant and the anti-inflammatory effects of these foods, especially olive oil and nuts. To adopt a Mediterranean-style eating plan, what you want to do is you want to reduce the amount of red meat that you eat or eliminate red meat. You want to cook with unsaturated fats like olive oil instead of cooking with butter. When you eat, you ought to try to fill your plate half with fruits and with vegetables. The more colorful you make your plate, the more antioxidants and nutrients you're going to be consuming. So berries, carrots, broccoli, red peppers, oranges, and spinach are all good choices. Avoid or reduce the intake of white rice or white potatoes. Follow the 80% rule. Anybody know what the 80% rule is?
Yes.
What's the 80% rule?
Leave 20% in your stomach empty.
The 80% rule is when you first start to feel yourself getting full, stop. 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 It takes about 30 minutes for our stomach to send the message to our brain that we're actually getting full. But in the process of eating, as we eat a meal, we'll say, I'm kind of getting to where I'm full. We should stop at that point. Don't eat anymore. Grains should be 100% whole grains. Oatmeal, quinoa, barley, and rye are all some of the healthiest whole grains. Wheatberry bread and brown rice are also excellent choices. Eat a handful of nuts every day and have fruit for a dessert. Avoid packaged snacks and desserts. The foods that all 5 of these groups eat worldwide are avocados, salmon, nuts, beans, oatmeal, and they drink soy milk. They move constantly. They are moving, they're exercising all the time. All 5 groups. A lot of these places do not have a gymnasium for these people to go to. But what they're doing is they're gardening, they're outside working, they're moving around. They don't get in the car and go someplace, they walk with where they're going. So it's not necessarily that you need to be going to the gym 2 or 3 times a week. It's just that we need to be moving more than what we're moving now. Ideal brain fitness includes aerobic and weight training. So we have a multiple of options that we can have in terms of exercise and moving. Mind-body activities like yoga seem to have a cognitive benefit as well. The key to any form of exercise is that you work to the very limit of your ability, pushing yourself as hard as you can, and it seems that the extra push translates into real brain benefits. And number 5, or E, excuse me, stress reduction. Stress is ever present in our daily lives. The human body was built to withstand short-term stresses like preparing for an upcoming work assignment or preparing for an exam. Long-term exposure to stress hormones can have a detrimental effect on the brain, particularly where at? In the hippocampus. We're going to keep coming back to that part of the brain because that's where it's at, in the hippocampus. When stress is prolonged, the brain undergoes functional changes that can be permanent. And the effects of stress on the brain can be significant, but fortunately, most of them are reversible to some extent. Ways to manage stress are exercise, deep breathing, meditation, maintaining social connections, and laughter. In summary, with research that confirms new cells are being made in the hippocampus daily, and with exercise, lifestyle changes, and continued use of the brain, new connections are made in the brain. Along with research in drug therapy, there is hope for prevention and possible reversal of Alzheimer's disease. So our takeaway from our talk today, and I'm on number 12, The risk of hypertension and cardiovascular disease is increased in African Americans by their high rates of being overweight or obese, diabetes, poor nutrition, poverty, poor education, and stress. The increased rates of Alzheimer's disease seen in African Americans seems to be related to their increased rates of cardiovascular disease. That's hypertension, heart disease, coronary artery disease, and stroke. And again, we keep coming back to being overweight or obese, being associated with hypertension, being associated with brain damage, being associated with Alzheimer's disease. 1 in 10 people over 65 will develop Alzheimer's disease, and 1 out of 3 people who develop Alzheimer's disease will die because of Alzheimer's disease. That's more deaths than breast cancer or prostate cancer. In 2018, the cost of Alzheimer's disease to the nation was $277 billion. The good news is, though, as reported just last year in August of 2018, the available evidence shows that the risk of developing Alzheimer's can be reduced, and the evidence indicates to achieve a lifetime of robust brain health, free of dementia, it's never too early or too late to strive for attaining ideal cardiovascular health by, as we went through just a moment ago, examining our relationship with God. Eating a healthy plant-based diet, low fat, and minimal red meat. If you live with someone or you know someone, encourage them to stop smoking. Regular physical activity. Maintain a normal weight. Keep your blood pressure, your cholesterol, your glucose, and your insulin levels normal. And again, this is information that you can get when you visit your primary care physician. It should be on a once-a-year basis. And continue to use your brain. Continue to educate yourself, read, remain intellectually curious. And this must include our children. Again, I hope we have an opportunity to come back. But this is at a stage now where the American Academy of Pediatrics has put out guidelines for children in terms of how much exposure they should now have to handheld devices. It's amazing that they had to come out and present these guidelines. Given the aging population and the severe impact that Alzheimer's disease has on African Americans, this positive message of risk reduction through lifestyle changes and continued education, meaning meaningful use of your brain, is important for every member of society, but especially for African Americans and Hispanics. And finally, and most importantly, people with a relationship with God far and away live longer, happier, healthier lives. We understand that everything goes through God, our Creator. If the early research holds up, religion and spirituality may play a part in reducing the risk of developing Alzheimer's, and it may play a part in slowing the progression of early Alzheimer's disease. Certainly, a relationship with God will get you to a place where there will be no more tears, no more sorrow, no more pain, and no more Alzheimer's disease. So I want to finish with text. Very familiar text. Philippians 4:6. But we're going to go to verse 9. Because there's some wisdom. There's we go. If you want to pull it up, that's fine. You can join me if you like. But Philippians 4:6 says that, don't worry about anything. Instead, pray about everything. Tell God what you need and thank Him for everything that He's done. And then you will experience the peace of God. That's something that only God can do, which will exceed anything that we can even understand. His peace will guard your hearts and minds as you live in Christ. But here's the kicker, verse 8. And now, dear brothers and sisters, one final thing. Yes. Fix your thoughts. That's right. Use your brain on what is true and honorable and right and pure and lovely and admirable. Think about things that are excellent and worthy of praise. Don't waste your brain. Keep putting into practice all you have learned and received from me. Because everything you heard from me and everything that you heard from me and you saw me doing. And then the God of peace, will be with you. So here the Bible tells us, use your brain. Thank you. Jordan, were we going to have questions now, or?
Let's take 3 questions, then we'll have a representative from the Alzheimer.
Yes, because we want to give you guys an opportunity to speak. Questions about the presentation?
Just a testimony, which is so powerful and so true. My son, plays the video games, and I'm sorry, Nick, this your testimony. But he was, oh, Mom, I said, how you doing in school? I always ask him, oh, Mom, I got it, I'm good. Then the grades come home, and it was like C's and D's on his report card. So my husband was like, you know what? We're taking the game away. You can only play the game on the weekend. The next report card that came in today, he was able to raise his hand when Pastor asked, how was the grades? This child is making A's and B's now. Taking that video game away from him during school day so he could use his brain to do what he needs to do. I'm telling you, that was powerful. I was blown away.
Well, clearly research shows that those video games and that screen addiction, it does nothing to improve the function of your brain. It's almost mind-numbing is what it is. But in terms of memory, and you're expanding your brain and your abilities, and your brain's ability to work better, to work more efficiently, it doesn't help.
2 quick questions.
Yes.
You gave the norms of hypertension, diastolic, and systolic. Is it true that the older a person gets, that the norms change?
Your physician is probably going to be, to answer your question, yes, your blood pressure is probably going to go up a little bit as you get older. That is true. And your physician will probably be a little bit more tolerant with your blood pressure going up because there are other things that happen as you get older. Your arteries get a little bit more harder. It's a little bit more difficult for your heart to beat with those hardened arteries. And sometimes some of your blood vessels will actually narrow. So by lowering your blood pressure, you really won't have, your heart won't be working hard enough to get blood pumped to your brain. So as you get older, your pressure is going to go up a little bit, and your doctor will probably be a little bit tolerant to your pressure going up some. But having said that, the lower your blood pressure is, the better it is, the better it was. Second question he had?
The second question.
Yeah.
You made a lot of relationships between this being related to this being related to that. And I heard a similar presentation at a public health seminar. And basically what they said was that there's a direct relationship between a person's education, their financial success, and their health.
Yes.
And of those 3, education is number 1.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And you said the same thing.
Exactly. We don't, we're going to see that the product, well, we see the product now of people being so poorly educated or opting out of the educational system and what that leads to for us as a society to deal with. People have no hope. They don't have a meaningful way to gain employment, and so what they do is they begin to resort to other things, which generally leads to somebody else getting hurt and killing somebody, but it also then leads to them being incarcerated. And so I read where the government today is basically determining how many jail cells to build now based on the number of single parent children. Yeah. They're planning for that now. So when you're calculating how many jail cells you need, so if you look at the past and then extrapolate from that, then you'll see that there's going to be a big demand for housing people. And so what we need to do is we need to figure out a way to get people better educated, to make them more productive. But undereducated people, they far and away have a much higher risk of developing Alzheimer's disease and dementia. No question.
I have a question in the state. The Adventists have 2 of the major support systems, right? diet and education. The Adventist school system is the second best in the world. Their food system is best. Why is it that African Americans who are Adventists don't benefit from that? Why don't they have school? Why don't they, what is the problem with the Adventists? What is the problem?
Well, that may be a little bit out of my lane. I don't know if I can answer that. I don't know if I can answer that question. But as I said earlier, what we already have at our disposal is a health message that we can tap into, that's easy to tap into. What we can also do is we can tap into the educational system. However, maybe we haven't been as good as we should have been in getting that message out. But what we clearly see in church today is we see that the numbers of young people that come to church are dwindling. They're going down. And you know what's directly related to that? My children have a life expectancy that's less than mine. In part because they don't come to church. Your children are going to have a life expectancy that's less than yours if your children don't come to church. So we see that our life expectancy in part goes down. In part we can explain that just because people don't see the utility of needing to come to church. And we can look in church ourselves. We see that. You have a question? Yes.
What is the correlation between dialysis and people that are having renal failure and dementia? Is it accelerated at that point in the brain? And if you could just kind of expound on that for a second.
Well, most people today who are on dialysis are probably related to diabetes.
Yes, it is.
And we know, we made that connection earlier, that diabetes is called Alzheimer's disease is called type 3 diabetes. So we know that there's just an absolute strong, extremely strong link between those people who have diabetes. And obviously if you're on dialysis, and that says that all of your renal function, your kidney function has basically been exhausted. Your kidneys are not functioning anymore. So that says that really in terms of your diabetes, that you really have some very long-standing diabetes, and you're at a very critical point in not only your kidneys functioning, but probably a lot of your other organs functioning. If your kidneys are not functioning, you can assume that your heart probably has had some damage too, and your brain as well. So there's a very, 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 very tight correlation between renal disease and related to diabetes in all schools.
Sir,
I'm sorry, go ahead. 1 second. Go ahead.
I just wanted to touch on what you were saying about our schools and our education. I think we've lost that emphasis that Adventists always put on our Adventist education. When our children go to our schools, they are more connected to our churches, and they learn all the benefits of the diet, the health, the lifestyle, and everything that kind of sometimes goes out the window when we mix our children with public education. So we have, I think the church itself has to take on some responsibility for our children not being in our church schools. When my kids were going to school, there was a temple plan that supported families that could not afford to send their kids to school.
Right.
And I think we need to go back to that so that our children are starting from the grammar school all the way up to college, going to our schools. They will have more benefit.
And I would agree with you. I think, and as I said earlier, I think the one thing that we can do in church, and we can start right now with doing that, is we can set aside time where we can talk about these issues of health and education. We take dedicated time and then invite our families to come, other people to come from the outside. And that's something we can do right away. You know? And we certainly today discussed the benefit of having a very good education. And we discussed today the benefit of just continuing to use your brain. And I'm not talking about using your brain in meaningless ways. I'm talking about asking your brain really to do something hard. Sit down and read. When they looked at people who developed Alzheimer's, they talked about listening to complex music. Do we understand what complex music is? Not complex in terms of trying to understand what they're saying. Okay? That's not the complexity. The complexity is classical music that has been written and played by an orchestra. Okay? But sometimes today we sit down and put classical. Every time I go out of my house, every time I leave my apartment and I come to church, you know what I do for my dog? I put classical music on for him. He's one of the greatest dogs in the world. And if I go out on Saturday night, they stop playing classical music at 8 o'clock, and they put jazz on after 9. So he's still covered. But that's the truth. Complex things, learning new languages, going and reading things that are hard, going places and traveling, some places you've never been before and you really want to explore it. It takes time to sit down and read about where you're going before you go there. Your brain's not going to break. I guarantee you, there's nobody walking around with a broken brain. If you challenge your brain, it's going to respond. It's designed that way. And we know who designed it, right? Absolutely. Last question? Yes.
Okay, I noticed on the strategy for health,
Ms. Loud.
you didn't mention any vitamins or supplements, and we know that that's like a multi-million-dollar industry. So
Right.
are there any recommended?
Okay, that's a good question.
What's the
I
question?
think, again, the question was, I didn't make any recommendation about eating supplements like vitamins and that sort of thing. I think that our first option should be in our diet,
Right.
okay? A plant-based diet. So if we're eating a well-balanced plant-based diet, we shouldn't have to worry too much about going out and getting supplements. The issue with getting supplements is this. When a drug company takes and puts a supplement into something to eat, number one, it doesn't have to be cleared by the FDA. So they don't have to go to the FDA and say, okay, this is going to lower your cholesterol. They can just market it as doing anything. Okay, that's the first thing. So it's not FDA approved. But sometimes those formulations are put in such a way that when you ingest them, they just pass right through you. You can't absorb them. You can't digest them. So, and we never know which companies are good, which companies are not good, and so so you could be spending money on supplements, but it may not, you may not be achieving what you're trying to achieve, okay? So again, I think we go back to our diet and make sure that we're eating a plant-based diet, and eat a wide variety of foods, and that's really the best way to do it. But have it loaded on the side of plants and vegetables, fruits. Okay. Come on up. This is Mr. Hill. He's from the Alzheimer's Association. And as I said earlier, I wanted to thank them for coming and joining us today. So he has some information here for us, and he also has he can answer some questions for us about the Alzheimer's Association here and whatever else the Alzheimer's Association is doing here. So please speak.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
I want to start off by thanking the church. It's a great blessing that you guys have here for the Church of Mental Health Ministry Day. So thank you for that commitment. The commitment to health and well-being goes a long way. With the Alzheimer's Association, we are a volunteer-led. There are some on-staff personnel, but I'm a volunteer. Most of the people that you'll see at the race, at the walks and at the outside events are all volunteers. We do it because we care about this organization. We care about this cause, and that's why I'm out here in the community to speak to you today.
Very good.
I believe the Alzheimer's Association is one of the best charities in the United States. That's why I dedicate my time to it. But I dedicate my time specifically to this charity because I'm personally affected. So as Dr. Reid here, I appreciate how much time he spent in getting this together for the congregation. So now I'll maybe switch gears. It's tough following up such an eloquent speaker here. As you can tell from my accent, I may not come off quite as educated as this gentleman. But I want to share my personal story so that hopefully it can help someone here. I'll tell you some of the difficulties that we had with the Alzheimer's diagnosis for my grandfather, and talk to you a little bit about best things that you can do to prepare, then hopefully answer any questions. I'll also talk about the resources available through the Alzheimer's Association. So to start with, my personal story. You can see me up here today. I'm probably one of the bigger gentlemen in the congregation, 6'2", been grown my whole, since this height since a teenager. My grandfather, I'd like to say, was the biggest man I ever met at 5'5.5". Okay. Extremely intelligent, hard worker, provided for my entire family, our entire life. I looked up to him. I convey the story all the time. Used to get off the school bus in the afternoons. This is a big yellow bus, okay? You couldn't miss this thing, especially down our long country road. You say you couldn't miss it from a country mile. You legitimately couldn't. So, but he'd let me get off the school bus and try to sneak up on him. We'd try to surprise each other every day. Obviously, he had to let me win a few times. But great relationship that I have with my grandfather, to watch this giant of a man, this extremely intelligent individual, the breadwinner, patriarch of our family, to then become just broken down by such a difficult disease. One of the most intelligent men I ever met, to be unable to recognize people that he loved, to be able to unable to communicate with us. And so I want to help others. Share specifically, and I do have a presentation, but I believe you guys have been here for quite a while today. So maybe I'll share as much as we want to. We can go through more. I can open up for a lot of questions and answers, or we'll just kind of see how it goes. We recognized that my grandfather had a serious issue, and we needed a diagnosis and take him to get checked out when he was found 3 cities away. And 3 cities isn't like here in this community of St. Louis, where that could be 32 blocks away. We're talking 32 miles away. So he was wandering. About 60% of Alzheimer's and dementia sufferers will wander at some point. It's unsafe. Nowadays, there are a lot of things you can do to try to handle that, prepare a plan. But obviously, we waited too long. By this time, he had really progressed into mid-stage Alzheimer's. Depending on where you're at, some of the medical facilities nowadays will talk about either 7 or 9 stages of Alzheimer's. For the Alzheimer's Association, we break it down just to 3 to keep it very simple for these classes and these trainings. So that's early, middle, and late stage Alzheimer's. So let's talk about what Alzheimer's or dementia is and what it isn't. So we use the term Alzheimer's a lot. It's because it's about 60% of all forms of dementia. If you would, we've been here a long time, let's stretch out just a little bit. Raise your hand if you drove here today. You rode in a vehicle. All right? Everybody came in some form of an automobile. All right? If it was a Ford, please raise your hand. Okay, just one. That Ford was an automobile, right?
Yes, it was.
But that automobile, all those automobiles were not necessarily Ford.
Right.
Okay? So as with Alzheimer's, Alzheimer's is a form of dementia, but not all forms of dementia are Alzheimer's. Okay? There's frontotemporal dementia with Lewy bodies. There's also Huntington's and Parkinson's disease that people are also well aware of due to some famous individuals having suffered. So those are some other forms of dementia. What they all are is a significant change in cognitive ability, a decline beyond regular aging. So Dr. Reid, I really appreciate you involving your wife and thanking her for being here with you. My wife is taking care of our child, but I thank her when I tell these because I make sure and share our family. So hopefully we can have a little laughter here when we talk about such a serious and detrimental disease. What is that significant decline? We'll talk about that in a minute. What is it not? My wife would tell you, if I didn't have my head screwed on, I might leave it somewhere. Okay? I work in an office, I carry a laptop bag, I put my keys in my laptop bag every day in the same spot, because if not, I will not know where my keys were. Okay? I'll leave them sitting on the table, I'll leave them sitting by the couch, they may fall out of my pocket in the car. About 2 weeks ago, I spent 25 minutes in the morning looking for them, so I found them in the car. Understand, that does not mean I have significant cognitive decline. That's the same thing I've been doing for 25 years. I'm just a little bit, I don't pay enough attention. All right? What also is not cognitive decline, what's not Alzheimer's or dementia? My wife gets frustrated with our children. I believe everybody in here has probably got frustrated with your children, you just did. When my wife does, she might rattle off the name of every sibling of hers and my daughter's in order to get to Brittany, Jessica, Teresa, Isabella. Be my youngest, who she's at home with today. That is in no way an indication. That's an indication of stress, right? That's in no way an indication of cognitive decline. When, as I talked about a moment ago, if I'm leaving my keys in the refrigerator or in a potted plant. Okay? If I'm having difficulty tying my shoes, brushing my teeth, I may sit in front of a lot of people have a difficult job at work. One of the things he said, if you've had a mentally challenging job, that's going to help you out in the future. But that doesn't in any way mean that you might not also have difficulty. Numerous doctors, surgeons, lawyers, physicians will have Alzheimer's or dementia. As with my grandfather, engineered, challenged himself all the time, creating things, but still effective, right? As we're doing those things that normally came natural to us, they become more and more difficult. That is dementia. That's Alzheimer's, when it becomes enough to affect daily life. Some of the signs and symptoms that we should have recognized with my grandfather until it got so far. Right? Early stage, that as the Alzheimer's Association likes to characterize it, keeping it simple, is when those things start to initially affect you. Okay? Difficulty with names, places, people you should remember, right? A lot of people say, I'll probably remember faces for a long time. I may not necessarily remember your name. That's not a big deal. But when you're struggling with family members' names, loved ones, things you should remember, the school you went to, the street you grew up on, those kind of security questions. If you're having trouble with the security questions, that's a definite indicator. My grandfather and I, when I was growing up, I used to open the gymnasium up at the church that my family attended every Tuesday. We'd play basketball until about 9 o'clock at night. My girlfriend and I would go to my grandparents' house and we would play rook. I don't know if anybody knows what rook is. It's a Southern card game. My grandfather was very competitive. That's probably part of where I get my competitive streak from. And he would not allow me from 6 years up to 16 to 26. There was never a lack of engaging and letting me win, right? When it became difficult for him to play those cards, right? When we used to go every Tuesday and we started missing a few Tuesdays because maybe they weren't interested or maybe just said he didn't feel well, that withdrawal from social activity, maybe you used to have family dinners, you're not having family dinners as much, these are all signs that you should start to recognize. Those trouble with names that they shouldn't have. Maybe not being able to make it to their doctor's appointment that they've been to for 25 years. Okay, again, it's not just having a little struggle with remembering something from last year, maybe remembering something from 15 minutes ago becomes a little more difficult. Those are early stage symptoms that we should be recognizing. Why do I encourage that you recognize? Because of the difficulty that you and your family can have if you're not getting involved early. Why is that? Everybody here likes being appreciated as a human being, like to have respect, like to be treated as an individual. That the people that care about you show that they care about you, right? That becomes much more difficult as the disease progresses. You have to consciously engage with that individual. So I want to make sure that we're talking about that. Why do you want to engage with them? You want to start as early as possible so they can be part of their care plan. I mentioned earlier I have a younger daughter named Isabella. I have two older daughters, Brittany and Kayla. My oldest daughter is 27. She just got married. They owned their first home. I'm very proud of her. I was just the officiant at her ceremony 3 weeks ago. Very proud father. My youngest daughter is 8 years old. She's probably not in a position in life where she's going to make too many financial and healthcare decisions for me, right? So my middle daughter would be another option. She's also the most vocal, most outgoing, most obnoxious child. And if I handed her 2 nickels, somehow there'd magically be 3 cents in her hand. Right? I don't want her making a single financial decision for me. Ever, probably. But at least not until she changes and I see that that's a good decision for me. If I don't tell them that and don't put it down in writing and don't have my wishes laid out, very clearly the loudest person in the room often wins. Right? So why do you want to be engaged? Because I want to have some say-so. Right? Maybe I want at-home care. Maybe I want to be placed into a facility. Everybody's different. People have a fear of how will Alzheimer's affect me, or how will I, as I age, I don't want to be put into a home. That's said a lot. There are others who, I grew up with a family who took care of an individual for 18 years. I don't want my family doing that. So I want to make it very clear, put me away from the family so I'm as less of a burden as possible, as early as possible. That's an individual decision, but it's one I have to speak to them, right? If I'm having cognitive decline, I'm not going to be able to intelligently put my wishes out to them. I'm definitely not going to be able to sign a legal document. And then once you have to sign a legal document, you have to get somebody declared incompetent, right? You have to go and see a lawyer to go through this rigmarole. You have to see a physician and get these forms and get these letters filled out. How much more costly do you believe that might be than going to a lawyer who can do this for $250? Okay? So that's why we want to encourage early detection. We want to get a diagnosis. Alzheimer's was discovered a little over 100 years ago by Aloysius Alzheimer. Those plaques and tangles that were discussed earlier were first postulated and put out there for everybody to understand, to start discussing. There was really no way to get a diagnosis for Alzheimer's up until roughly 35, 40 years ago without an autopsy. Okay, so now you can go through a battery of tests. They do mental cognitive testing. They do MRI and brain scans, and you can get a fairly definitive answer that you are affected by some form of dementia. You can do blood tests and other things. One of the other things I want to encourage is that you take these and get these diagnoses because it might rule some things out. Urinary tract infections, blood pressure, side effects of diabetes can all mimic dementia. So if you're not saddled with a life-ending diagnosis like Alzheimer's, wouldn't you like to be able to take a couple of pills a week to fix that problem? So please, I recommend that you go and see a doctor. I also recommend that you don't go and see your personal doctor. Okay? And I'll tell you why that is. Very few physicians are skilled specifically in those age-related specifics of what's going on. Geriatrics, gerontologists, neuropsychiatrists, people that are specifically focused on age-related. Also, your personal physician is just like the family who's seen you for the last 25 years and has maybe watched you make a few mistakes in life, knows I put my keys everywhere, probably left them in his office and had to run back for a jacket or a phone or something more than once in the 25 years I've been going to this doctor. So maybe he doesn't see my forgetfulness as anything more significant than just Daniel being Daniel. He covered so much that we normally cover in a lot of these presentations about healthy living, things that you can do to delay. As he mentioned, there right now is no cure. Right? We can only hope to delay the symptoms or onset. What do we do otherwise? How are we going to come up with a cure? The Alzheimer's Association's mission, and I'll put it very simply, right? We could go into the mission statement a lot, but it's help today and hope for tomorrow. What is hope for tomorrow? That I would like to find a cure. That all of those risk factors that we went through, I might be a little bit overweight. I might not be as much as I used to be, thankfully. But I might be a little bit overweight. My grandfather passed away with Alzheimer's. So there's family history, genetics, health, all those things. So I'm at risk. I want a cure. We are in an area that's on the cutting edge. Washington University is a world leader in Alzheimer's research. BJCC is actually pretty good here in St. Louis as well. So there's a lot of opportunity to get involved in clinical trials. The Alzheimer's Association supports a program called Trial Match. Trial Match for the Alzheimer's Association is basically like an insurance broker. Okay? They don't provide the trials. We're not running any trials. We're just trying to see who you are and what your background is to fit you with the right trial that might help you out. Why do I encourage Trial Match? Because I want to find a cure. And how do we do that without study, without research, and without people taking part? We don't. So if you're interested, please get with the Alzheimer's Association and see about signing up for a trial match. What I can guarantee you is it will not take up that much of your time, generally about a day a year, and that day it'll just be a few hours. Maybe even doing an online questionnaire because they want healthy and sufferers both alike to take part in these programs so that we can see baselines for what's good and what we should see versus those who are affected and those who are at risk. And then also though, what's the other side effect of getting in a program? That you're going to get phenomenal medical care. You're going to get checked out, right, at no cost to you. Some of the programs may even be paid programs. So please reach out to the Alzheimer's Association if you're interested. Speaking more about the Alzheimer's Association, as far as what we do out in the community, I'm out here speaking to you today. I am a volunteer. We encourage for more volunteers. hopefully it's probably not lost on anyone else in here, that I am not as well dressed, nor do I look exactly like the rest of the congregation. The reason being that we would like to have a more diverse volunteer, thank you so much more diverse group of volunteers. How do we get that? That a more diverse group of people volunteer. So if you're interested in volunteering, you can get with me today and I will put you in contact with our volunteer coordinators. I know I'm not showing a lot of slides. I'm trying to give my personal story. I've talked about kind of what the Alzheimer's Association has a lot of resources available to you. Let me flip through some slides here. We'll skip some videos. See if that.
I noticed that it was a time when I was at home and the buttons were, I couldn't dial the phone. And so I went to the neurologist and she said, she basically, they didn't have this test and they said they didn't see that anything was different. But then a couple of months later, I noticed that not only could I not dial the phone, but I was having difficulties writing. I was having difficulties spelling certain words like up and
A little technological difficulties there. But again, it's problems that affect daily life. I just want to skip through here and really get to what's available through the Alzheimer's Association. Went the right way. Here we go. So the Alzheimer's Association has community resources that are available to you. One of the things I very, very highly recommend. I live in the middle of nowhere, Alabama. When I say middle of nowhere, that's 15 miles to the closest gas station, 32 miles to a Walmart. I love living in St. Louis. I'll be one of the biggest proponents of how great of a community it is. There's so much for families here in St. Louis. But for me, I have about 4 grocery stores within 5 minutes of my house. So when I forget things, which I often do, I'm able to run back and re-up the supplies. So here in St. Louis, you have so much available. The Alzheimer's Association chapter office is on Olive Boulevard, so it's not far from here at all. There are people there all day till 5 o'clock during the week. And then we have an 800 number that's 24/7. But again, here in the community, and just to brag a little bit on the St. Louis chapter, the Alzheimer's Association, you hear about charities all the time that maybe give 50% of what they take in for research or for support outside of the group, the pay and the advertising. The Alzheimer's Association gives back 85%. Okay, that's phenomenal. And the St. Louis chapter, 92. Okay, so if $1 comes in, 92 cents is going back to the people in the community or for research to find a cure. I believe that. I mean, it's just such a worthwhile organization. What does it support? So that 24/7 helpline, all these questions you might have, and I'm here today, I'll answer every question that I can for you. But I'll tell you, one of the things that we try and set up, and I try to encourage, is called a care consultation. So if you're concerned that an individual you care about may be suffering from Alzheimer's or dementia, you could call and set up a care consultation. And what does that care consultation do? It talks about what questions do you need to answer? What information do you have to go see a doctor? Who in the local area might be able to help you? What resources are there? And once you set up that care, you can start to detail a care plan for yourself. What's that care plan? Like I talked about, at some point, I want to be put in a home, right? Maybe, as part of my care plan, I recognize at some point I won't be able to drive, right? This is a conversation that lots of people in this Alzheimer's dementia don't like to have. They don't like to give up that independence of driving a vehicle. It's a very big deal, right? So if you can plan earlier, though, well, I'm not saying it's going to happen, Mom or Dad, Just saying, if it does though, don't you want to be able to have some say-so over how it happens?
Right.
Do you maybe want me to come pick you up on Tuesdays to take you to get groceries? What do you want to do with the car? Right? Do you want to sell the car? Do you want to put the money in the bank? You want to buy some new furniture for the house? You want to donate it to your grandkid? Whichever one you like the most. Right? But let them have a say-so. And that's a way to approach some of these situations. But to set up this care plan, that 800 number, there are people there who've answered that question 1,000 times over. Okay? I also recommend, people ask me all the time, how do I get a diagnosis? I gave you a little bit of advice, and probably don't go to your primary care physician. You could ask them for a recommendation. But check with your insurance. I try not to give recommendations because I don't know your personal situation. But if you call the Alzheimer's Association, they can talk about what's in network, what's in your local area, what makes you feel comfortable. You know, it could be male, female, age of physician, whatever you want to go to, so that you have the best conversation you can have. Yes, ma'am?
What is the reason for not going to your physician?
Again, that if you had, it's a brain issue, right? If you have a brain issue, is your primary care physician who you go to for the flu
Right.
best suited to answer brain care questions, right? If you break an arm, probably go to the emergency room. You don't go to the guy who gives you a flu shot.
Right. And something I just thought about, I watched a very, very good movie, Still Alice, and you spoke about prevention. You know, it starts from when you're little. But in this movie, this woman there's a certain form of dementia or Alzheimer's that's hereditary, and I don't know that preparing, from early on is going to prevent you from having Alzheimer's.
So genetically, there's an APOE1 gene that says you might be predisposed to have Alzheimer's. I could have been predisposed to grow to be 6'7", but I didn't, and I'm not in the NBA yet, right? What there also is, though, is there's another gene that only is about 1% of Alzheimer's patients that will guarantee that you will get Alzheimer's. It is indicative, not possible, right? It's an indicative gene. So it basically says that this will translate to suffering from Alzheimer's. But that's only 1%, like about 1.5% of Alzheimer's sufferers. So physically, there are things that you can do, and there's even medications that you can take that will slow symptoms. They will not slow the progression of the disease, but they can help you to live a more productive life during that early stage. So I talked already about early stage. I talked a little about middle stage. Like when my grandfather was wandering, having real difficulty, losing things, not able to communicate as well. The Alzheimer's Association has different programs out there, like effective communication, dealing with behaviors. So if you're someone who is a care partner for someone with Alzheimer's or dementia, I highly recommend checking those out. They're also available on our website. One of the other things, and one of the reasons I first mentioned about living out in the middle of nowhere, is being in St. Louis, you can find a community of support. You're here in a church. I assure you that your church family would support you, right? But there are people who you can get into a group of other like-minded, like-situated individuals and take part in a support group, right? There are support groups geared towards females, geared towards African Americans, geared toward this community, etc., that you might best find one that fits you. So you can sit in a room and talk about the problems you're having that might be very different than the problems I would have had with my grandfather in the middle of nowhere, Alabama, 35 miles from anything, right? Wandering for my grandfather without a set of car keys just meant that another family member of mine a mile away on the same road would have picked him up and brought him home. Wandering a mile away in St. Louis might mean he's in a very unsafe, very different part of town than wherever he lives. And definitely where no one knows him, because where in that mile in Alabama there may have been 10 families, of which 8 were related to me, there are probably 500 families of which 0 are related to you, which is also another thing that Alzheimer's has always had this stigma that, oh, you know, they have mental problems, people are suffering. It's a disease, right, that will happen, you can't help it. Engaging your community, letting your neighbor, you know, talking to your neighbor, maybe asking them if they can come over. Some of the behaviors that we talk about, a lot of people see distrust and don't understand. I'll give you one of the examples that we use in our understanding and relating to behaviors. Mom says, somebody's always looking in my window, right? They're looking at my window. I know they want to come in here and rob us. I know they want to do something, right? So, Mom, Dad, what's going on? Why is that? What's happening? What time, you know? Well, they come around here, you know, middle of the day, always looking in. I know they're out there. They come by every single day. Okay, who comes by every day? Drops off the mail, right? Mailman. So what could an individual who's a caregiver for that person do? Get the mail diverted to your house, right? Maybe move the mailbox to a different area of the yard so they're not right in the front picture window where they answer these questions. But first and foremost, also, the elderly are preyed upon. Check and make sure that something's not legitimately happening. So just to give everybody something quick that you can take with you here in that behaviors class, we teach a 4-step method to handling dementia-related behaviors. This could be with any mentally challenging situation. But one is detect and connect, join their reality, we say. Right? So when coming into my grandfather in the later stages, I would, hey grandfather, it's your grandson, Daniel. I'm here to fix the TV. Calm tone, let him know who I am, who he is to me, why I'm there. Now I can go work on the TV, right? Which back then was just been hitting it on the side. But understand that that's a big difference in how you, if not, he could have thought I was my father, right? He could have not known who I was. He could think it's a different time of year, different year at all. And a lot of times that does happen. And so we say join their reality. So if he wanted to talk to me as though I'm my father, if I try and argue with him, I'm his grandson, he may not even remember mentally at that time his grandson. So just go with it, right? You might even enjoy the conversation a little better and get to hear some things you would not have known in a different connection. I enjoy that people are laughing. Sometimes it's a very stressful situation and you just got to laugh about it, right? So join their reality. Number 2, address their physical needs first. So physically, was that lady worried about the mailman? Is something actually happening? Check the bank account, make sure nobody is taking advantage of them. Check for urinary tract infections or anything that might drive more erratic behavior. Check blood pressure, that kind of thing. Then emotional needs. And then number 4, reevaluate the situation. Because things that work today may, things that, just because something doesn't work, work today doesn't mean it'll always work. And try it the first time it fails doesn't mean you give up trying, just means you try something different. So maybe record what was going on until you figured out, oh, it was the mailman, right? And now we figure out how to handle it. So hopefully I've answered a few questions. We talked about, hopefully I've opened you up to what the Alzheimer's Association is. That 800 number is up there. It's on all of our literature. You have some literature in the packets that were handed out to you. I told you about our organization. I don't ask that anybody donate any money. That's not what we're here for. We're actually here to open you up to what we can do for you. There's actually even a respite care fund. So if there's anyone here who's an at-home caregiver today, you most likely qualify for a $500 fund there that allows you some free time to get out. They'll pay for some at-home care for you to handle. So if you're interested in that, that's at alz.org as well. So those are some community resources. What I do ask is that you get engaged and involved on our website. You can become an advocate. You could write a letter to your congressman, which nobody does nowadays. But you can go online to alz.org, click it, put in your zip code and your street address, and it'll tell you who your congressman is. With a couple clicks of the button, you can say, Alzheimer's matters to me. And then there's the Walk to End Alzheimer's. It's our largest fundraising and awareness event of the year. So don't get me wrong, I would love, there are, I think 1.4 million people in the St. Louis metro area, 380,000 in St. Louis proper. I'd love to see 1.4 million people. I'd love to see $1.4 million get donated, but I'd much more rather see 1.4 million people show up to say Alzheimer's matters, because then that's going to make a real impact. As a charity organization, one that's funded by donors and government grants, how how do we get those funds? We get out in the community and make our presence known. So I asked that if you would, I only brought 13 sign-in sheets with me. I wasn't prepared for such a great group, so thank you. But I would ask that you would get here and just get a simple sign-in sheet with your name. If you won't contact it, I do have contact sheets that you can fill out. But if you just put your name, your zip code, and email address or phone number, and you can put don't contact me or contact me. But that says I was here. Says, why does it matter that I was here? Well, if you were donating $1.4 million,
Right.
would you want to know that we were doing something with your money? Right? So please, for me, all right, I'm asking, that's the one thing I'm asking personally, is that you at least let us know that I was here. Right? And if it was in any way helpful to you, feel free to drop another note, drop an email, or fill out one of those sign-in sheets. And on there you can either offer to be a volunteer, which we would love some people from this community to be more engaged in volunteering in this community, right? Also, if you want information about Alzheimer's, information about the diagnosis, you can also check in one of those sheets. Like I said, I do have some sheets that you can sign in. And then as a volunteer, I'll get those emailed over to them in the next couple of days. They normally respond within a week. If it's beyond a week, blame me, that maybe I didn't get it into them quick enough. Open for questions. Yes, ma'am.
You talked about donations or monetary donations, the only type of donations that you will accept. So for instance, if you have it, like I know, Red Cross, they will take an old car.
The Alzheimer's Association, as far as I know, is only set up and geared for financial donations. I highly recommend you call the 800 number and ask them about it, because I wouldn't want to turn down anything that we were willing to take for a benefit, because again, as high as almost any charity in the United States, that donation is going directly back to helping the community and helping find a cure. Other questions? All right, thank you.
One thing I do want to say that's important for us is that when I spoke about hypertension and I spoke about all the medication that hypertensive people take, and only some of them have their blood pressure controlled, some of that may be because they don't take their medication. Some group of blacks may not respond to medication as the majority population does. So unless we can encourage people to come into studies, and so if you have a family member that's been diagnosed with Alzheimer's or dementia, when you go for your caregiver, what they're going to ask you is they're going to ask you, do you want to enroll into a study? We don't have enough African Americans in these studies to see whether there's a difference in the way, the way African Americans respond versus Caucasians respond. All we know is that they're just getting the same medication. We know now in breast cancer that there are black women that respond differently than Caucasian women do. And we know that now because we studied enough black women to know that their therapy can be a little bit different than Caucasian women based on the type of tumor that they have. So the point that he made a moment ago about volunteering, and if you have a loved one or you know someone that's been diagnosed, one of the most helpful things that you can do is encourage them to be enrolled in a study so that they can be studied. And then that will help them better fine-tune therapy for everybody, but if they're black, then that'll help as well.
I got a question. Do you have to already be diagnosed to be in the study?
No, absolutely not. Like I said, if you put information down, if she'll get a sheet together that you guys can sign up for, and if you're interested in trial match, maybe put a note to the side trial match, and there will be someone reach out and contact you. Okay? And again, it may not fit everybody, but we will try to put you in one if there's any possibility that it leads to a cure. I already mentioned Washington University's Cutting Edge. It's, in my opinion, highly likely that the first person cured of Alzheimer's, which I believe will happen, right? Faith in our Lord, I believe that will happen, in St. Louis. We're leaving, so wouldn't it be nice, right?
Yeah. Any other questions? Well, we want to thank everybody for coming. The reason I asked Geraldine to come up was because there's oftentimes a lot of people who are working behind the scenes that are putting a lot of things together, donating their time to make this happen. And she did. Alzheimer's Association is here. We thank them for coming as well. And you can see the benefit of people collectively working together to put something together to disseminate some information. So I want to thank both of you. Absolutely. Let's close in prayer. Okay? Heavenly Father, we want to thank you again today for what you've given us. You allowed us to just peek into your awesome creativity, and we thank you again, God, for that. We trust and pray that the information that's been given today will be helpful. It will help us to transform, rearrange our life, change some priorities that we have so that we can restore what has been lost, but we can continue to live healthier, longer lives. Thank you for the Alzheimer's Association who came today, who donated their time, Jody who graciously donated her time, and we thank most of all the church, the audience that came, and we thank you again, God, for just being here today in our midst. We say thank you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
And some of you may have family members that are out of town that have someone that has Alzheimer's. Tim has graciously videotaped this, and it is on YouTube, so you can stop with him and he'll give you that link for that. And as Daniel had said, we didn't have as many sign-up sheets, but if you could just sign this with your zip code, just so that they can know how many people were here.
And if you want contact, put a phone number or email address.
Okay.
Prefer contact.
Can you sign that? And then,